Brian, thank you for your willingness to be courageous enough to share your story, but also for taking my invitation today and being with us here. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, certainly. So, would you mind sharing a little bit about, your career leading up until now in the legal world, and then kind of what it is that you're doing in your work now, and what led you to that?
Sure. Well, like as you said, I'm a native of Pittsburgh, born and raised. But I've lived in Dallas since I graduated law school. I went to the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. I went to Penn State undergrad, and my legal career was really one that was influenced heavily by drugs and alcohol. Uh, as I started my journey as a lawyer, by the time I came to Dallas in '86 after graduating, and I failed the Texas bar exam 3 times, all as a result of cocaine and alcohol being more important to me. The first time I took the Texas bar, I rented a hotel room out in Fort Worth, Texas, about 30 miles from Dallas, the weekend before the bar exam, and my study aids were a 3.5 ounces of cocaine, affectionately known as an 8 ball, a
Mm.
a fifth of Jack Daniels as a liter of Tab. So yeah, I was really preparing myself for the bar exam, for a different kind of bar exam, right?
Right, right, sure,
So,
sure.
but that was a microcosm of my life as a practicing lawyer, which I eventually lost all my clients and really lost my career to drugs and alcohol.
Mm.
And it wasn't, and I've never been there. Probably your listeners are probably wondering, has this guy ever been suspended or disbarred? No, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. I mean, I did cocaine in the federal courthouse, the state courthouse. I attended hearings under the influence of Xanax, under the influence of blow. It was a mess. It really was a mess. And I
Mm.
don't say that as a badge of honor, but in the legal profession, you may be surprised to know that we have the highest alcohol, quote unquote, alcoholism, alcohol use disorder rate
Mm.
of any white collar profession, over 20%.
Mm.
And to put that in perspective, the last stat I saw, it was online. It was that about 11% of all Americans, adults, could be classified as problem drinkers.
Mhm.
And they said we're a nation in crisis from an alcohol standpoint. We're over 20%. And if you're a millennial female lawyer, that goes up over 30%.
Wow.
And there was a recent study that hit on the pandemic, and that female lawyers were pushing 40% problem drinkers of licensed attorneys.
Mm.
So it is a profession kind of in crisis in terms of our attachment to alcohol.
Mhm. Those are powerful statistics, and yeah, to your point, if 11% is considered to be a crisis here in, the States due to our problem drinking, what does 20% make it? So that's certainly powerful. I'm curious from your vantage point, what you think led, in your particular instance, what led you to the engagement of these substances?
That's a great question. And it is a life of snapshots. I believe we're all an accumulation of snapshots of our life, right? Little pictures that encompass a moment in time or encompass a period in time, snapshots of pain, snapshots of joy, snapshots of trauma, snapshots of loss and grieving. And so my snapshots, we have to go back to Pittsburgh, PA. I'm a boomer back when cell phones were 2 cups attached to a string, and going viral meant 10 kids in the lunchroom knew you had a crush on a girl and were passing notes about it. A different time, right?
Yeah.
And I'm the middle of 3 boys. I have an older brother, Mark, who your listeners may know from Shark Tank and the Mavericks. I have a younger brother, Jeff. Mark, as you might expect, as he was the firstborn. He was outgoing, selling this door to door, selling that door to door. Even as a teenager, I remember our local newspaper went on strike, and he and his buddies drove out to Cleveland, about 200 miles away, and bought
Mhm.
their newspapers, drove them back to Pittsburgh, sold them on a street
Wow.
corner. That's what they paid for them.
Yeah,
So you knew,
that's
kind of knew what he was going
entrepreneurship.
to do.
Yeah, yeah.
My younger brother, Jeff, good looking, nationally ranked wrestler in high school, the beer parties, the prom, the dates, all of the things that I associated with peer acceptance and and love and joy. I
Mhm.
was classic middle child syndrome. I was shy, I was withdrawn, and I internalized anything negative said about me and wore it as who I was, like as a skin tight suit. And I was also a heavy kid trending towards obese. Unfortunately, I also had a difficult relationship with my mother. And I'm going to make it clear to everyone watching or listening that I do not blame my mother for the mental health issues I went through, or my parents or anyone. Uh, there is a difference between cause and correlation, as I'm sure we all know, right?
Mhm.
The same two people can go through the exact same thing. One person will experience it one way, another person will experience it another way. That's why it's correlation, not cause. And so there was a lot of fat shaming in my household. My mother was used to, my late mother sold real estate, and she would come home and I would come home for lunch and I would pull out the Chef Boyardee ravioli and the beefaroni. We didn't have an electric can opener, so I stick the spoon right in. No microwave. I wouldn't even boil it. I just shovel it in. My mom would walk into the kitchen, and not all the time, but every now and then she'd say, Brian, if you keep eating like that, you're going to be a fat pig. Now,
Mm.
the things my grandmother said to my mother. My grandmother, according to my mother, was a diagnosed schizophrenic.
Mhm.
And I'm sure these were words in different ways used by my great grandparents to my grandparents. I'm Jewish, and I come from an Eastern European, Lithuania on that side. You know, the kind of the stereotypical Jewish grandmother, eat,
Mhm.
eat, eat, right? And there was a very kind of dysfunctional relationship around food with my mother. And
Mhm.
she had a horrible relationship with her mother,
Mhm.
very verbally and mentally abusive. And these things kind of run downhill. And being someone who was shy and at home all the time, I trended towards social isolation. I took the brunt of it. And to hear these things, and I was getting bullied at school over my weight. And to hear these things, you might imagine it, you grew depressed, not understanding it. You start thinking your mother doesn't love you. She loved me dearly. She was just going through her own mental health issues at a time when a woman couldn't talk about these things at all. You could risk losing your children, get put in a psychiatric ward. It was a
Yeah.
different time. It was a different time. So I began to eat more as a mechanism to quell my depression, and I grew heavier and heavier, and I became a bigger Brian and a bigger Brian, and the bullying intensified at school, and it all culminated in what I call the day of the gold pants. Going back to the boomer age, I was a freshman in high school in 1976, and there was a movie called Saturday Night Fever that had just come out,
Mhm.
starring John Travolta, and it sort of brought the disco era into vogue. Uh, some of your listeners may have to go look up disco, Google disco.
Yeah.
But it was all the rage back when I was a
Yeah.
freshman in high school, disco. And my brother Mark taught it, believe it or not, in downtown Pittsburgh. And the thing was the platform shoes and bell bottom pants. And Mark would come home with with the platforms and these pants that had flowers on them and all these different types of bell bottom pants that
Yeah.
were popular back in the day, and the tight shirts. And one day he walked into my room with a pair of shiny gold bell bottom disco pants. And he said, do you want these? I said, sure. I love my brother. We're very close. We're close then. We're close now. And he gave me the pants, and I decided I was going to wear those pants to school. But the pants fit Mark fine. He wasn't a big kid. I had to jump up and down. I had to spray the water bottle. My butt looked like 15 cats trying to get out, but I didn't care. I got in them and pulled the zipper up tight, and I wore them to school, and the kids made fun of me. And I developed a very self-deprecating sense of humor. They said, you're a fat pig. They say, well, you need to go to Sears and Roebuck and get a bra for your man boobs.
Mm.
Those who know what Sears is, it's kind of not a thing
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and so I became the sad clown, because in my mind, again, this is before Instagram and the internet and all that stuff. These were my visions of popularity and perfect looks were the people I saw every day. The,
Mhm.
the prom queen, the kids who were getting their first kiss, the kids
Mhm.
getting their first girlfriend or boyfriend, walking down the hall between the lockers in the high school, holding hands, going to the after school football game, being invited to the house parties, all the things that I wanted to be included with, but felt I was too ugly and too
Mm.
just not worthy of being invited. So I kept to myself. to spare myself the rejection,
Hmm.
projection of rejection, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So one day I'm walking home from school. It's a mile walk to my house, along the sidewalk in a busy street with these kids. Again, they're the popular kids and kids I tried to hang around, and they're making fun of my shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. And I'm laughing it off. And one of the kids pulls at the zipper that was already, and it rips right at the zipper just under the belt line. And he goes, ooh. And another kid pulls at it and it rips some more. These kids then physically assaulted me. They tore off my pants, ripped them into shreds down to my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities. I was wearing a Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirts, 3-ring tube socks, and my kids' tennis shoes. And they threw them out in the busy street, walked high-fiving like they had done the funniest thing ever. Kids can be cruel, then and now. And I walked out in the street, picked them up as when traffic allowed, and I waddled, put them over my, underwear and waddled home. It was, that walk might have well have been from, New York to California. That's how long it seemed. And the
Sure.
worst part of it was the stoplights, because every stoplight seemed to take forever. And people are looking and they're looking, but no one asked if anything was wrong. And I finally make it home, and the house is empty, it's funeral quiet. And I walk down to our basement, and I remember it was these faded blue painted stairs going down to the basement, and they creaked. It was an older house, and they creaked. And with every creak, I felt it was like ripples on the water, like throwing a stone into the water. You know how it ripples out?
Hmm.
And it was rippling out to my mother, who said, "I told you so." And she wouldn't have said that. She wouldn't. And rippling out to my brothers, who said, "Dude, you can't stand up for yourself." Rippling out to my father, who fixed cars a mile away. "Oh, Brian, you're not worthy of being a Cuban." And of course they wouldn't have said that. My brothers would have gone and kicked their ass if I told them, but I didn't tell anyone. I found a trash can, pulled out the newspapers and the Chef Boyardee cans, and I put those shreds of those pants that my brother had given me at the bottom, hoping it would hide my shame, hoping I would never think about it again, hoping no one would say anything at school. And that's not how trauma works. Trauma threads, trauma remembers, and trauma has a way of coming out even when you think you've forgotten about it,
Mm.
compartmentalized it at time in ways and at times in your life when you may not even realize that that's what's driving it. And it
Yeah.
was right around then in that basement, after hiding those shreds, that I remember for the first time seeing a reflection of myself. There was this old mirror down in the basement, and seeing my reflection and seeing just a monster, a fat pig, unworthy of love by his mother, who loved me dearly, his family, unworthy of ever getting married or having a girlfriend. And that was my first snapshot of trauma. And that was something that really threaded through my life. That was the beginning.
Yeah.
That was the beginning.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brian, for just giving us an inside look into such an experience that it's evident that you've confronted that now because you remember with such vivid detail, and you've explained to us in a way that as you're sharing, I'm envisioning. And you're right. People can be cruel, and kids certainly can be. And fortunately, I never endured any sort of bullying type of environments, but so many do, and so many do suppress it. And it leads me to think about how we can get to a place in our world today where people are more willing to speak up about these types of things, because even as young kids we're taught to suppress, right? Like we can't speak up. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, kind of maybe what gave you the courage to finally begin confronting these different snapshots of your
Well,
life.
you have to understand the progression. So I'll compress it, but I'll give you a little more of the progression. And you have to remember, this was at a time, this was a much different time than it is today. We do have awareness, and people are talking at schools have zero tolerance bullying. That wasn't a thing, right?
Right.
This was back in the day where you had the ads in the back of the comic books, right, about getting sand kicked in your face. And you were weak if you allowed yourself to be bullied. You were just weak. Much different time. But because it was a much different time, I took that trauma into college at Penn State, where I developed an eating disorder. And at a time before people were talking about it for men or women, I developed bulimia, which is binging and purging. And nobody was talking about it. There was a singer, a beautiful singer called Karen. Her name was Karen Carpenter with the Carpenters. She was a drummer for the Carpenter. Beautiful voice, if you ever have a chance to check it out. She died from complications related to anorexia in 1983. And it brought eating disorders into the pre-digital national spotlight. This was 1980. This was before that. I didn't even know it was an eating disorder. I didn't know what it was. But it was the binging and purging was kind of like a moment where I felt okay. Every time I did it at Penn State, I'd go into the community bathroom, go in the stall, flush the toilet so no one could hear. And but then the shame swept in because I was engaging in this act that I didn't have a name for, didn't understand, but I inherently knew that guys didn't stick their fingers down their throat and vomit up their food. Right? That's not a manly thing.
Right.
And so all the time, these were coping mechanisms trying to deal with the fact that I just absolutely hated myself at 18 years old. I despised myself and thought I was not worthy of even living. And that transitioned into drinking by the time I was in my 20s. And by the time I was a sophomore at Penn State, I was a full-blown alcoholic. I was going to class drunk. In the mornings, I was going to class hungover. I remember I would go into there was this alley that had all the bars off the main street of Penn State, and I would go to the liquor store and buy a little bottle of tequila, and I'd drink the tequila in the alley, swig it, so I could get drunk before I go into the bar to get drunker and hope that I could be this different Brian that was outgoing, but it would just make me even more depressed because it didn't turn me into a different Brian. Alcohol is a depressant. And that really, I was a criminal justice major at Penn State. I wanted to be a police officer. That would have worked out well. I'd have been the first guy in the evidence room trading out the cocaine for the baby laxative, right? But like the Cuban connection, like the French connection. But so I ended up going to law school. And I went to law school not because I wanted to be this great lawyer, emulate Clarence Darrow, Atticus Finch, had this illusions of changing the world. I went to law school for the sole reason that I knew law school was 3 years, and I could stay in school for 3 more years, and I could drink, I could binge and purge, and I could engage in all these behaviors that have become the only things that I owned at Penn State. These coping mechanisms that I couldn't let anyone take away from me if I had to go out in the real world. Right? Can you imagine being a cop that had an eating disorder and drank and so if I stayed in school 3 more years, I was protecting myself. That's why I went to law school. And so I walked through the doors of Pitt Law as an alcoholic with an eating disorder. Again, this was 1983 at a time when no one was really talking about these things. Residential treatment wasn't really a thing. The only way you would probably know about help is if you ran into someone who was in 12-step. And for those who don't know, the most well-known alcohol focused is AA, but there are others. So if you ran into someone like that who wanted to help you, it just wasn't a thing. And I remember in law school, the closest I ever came to any epiphany on recovery was walking into a hamburger joint. It might have been a White Castle. But and they had this rack drunk, of course, and they had this rack of pamphlets out. And that at that time, I don't know if they still do it, that the 12-step groups put out called the 20 questions. And it was geared towards college students. Do you black out? Do you miss class? And I'm checking off yes to all these questions, and I just crumple it up, throw it in the wastebasket, said to myself, I'm a college student. We all do that. We all drink like this. That was as close as I ever came in law school. But in law school, the problem is at Penn State, I could pull it together for a night, study all night, straight percentage grading, give the information back, and I got okay grades despite my problem. That doesn't work in law school.
Yeah, yeah, it's demanding.
Right,
You know,
you can't just pull, at least I couldn't, maybe so, you
yeah,
can't just pull all-nighters the night before an exam. So I did was not a good student. I graduated near the very bottom of my class,
yeah.
graduated by the skin of my teeth. I used to have reoccurring nightmares with the dean of the law school, and I go to get my diploma, pulling it back, going, "Psych, you didn't graduate." And, the ironic thing about that is I was so apathetic, so ashamed that I didn't even bother going to graduation. Just mail it to me. But
Wow.
the serendipitous thing about that, it was 3 years ago during the pandemic, they invited me back and I keynoted the 2020 commencement, 2020 or 21 Pitt Law School commencement, and wore the cap and gown for the first time.
That's neat. Yeah, I saw that presentation available on YouTube. I don't know if it was on Pitt's page
Yeah,
or your page, but
so that to give you that gives you the context of moving to Dallas and going out into the world practicing law as an
yeah.
alcoholic. I moved to Dallas. I took the Pennsylvania bar exam, passed, moved to
Mhm,
Dallas, moved in with my brothers Mark and Jeff,
mhm,
because they were the two people I knew that wouldn't judge me.
yeah,
And it
yeah,
was like throwing gasoline on a fire because they didn't do drugs, but they're out drinking. They were young, they're dating. So
sure.
nobody knew I had a drinking problem because everyone was drinking.
Yeah, yeah.
Then in the summer of 1987, in the bathroom of this upscale nightclub, wearing the only suit I owned, pretending I'm this lawyer who hadn't even passed the bar yet. I think it was a Thursday night, going with a buddy of mine. I did my first line of cocaine. A buddy of mine said, "You want to try this?" Never tried, never even seen it before. Said, "Sure." So I tried it. And you know what was funny about that? I remember I bent over this nasty toilet, and cocaine users, we're an ironic bunch, right?
Mhm,
Especially in pandemic times. You wash your hand, you use a Purell, but we'll stick a dollar bill up our nose that
mhm,
has God knows what on it, and bend over a toilet that has the nastiest crap ever on it and inhale. Go figure.
mhm.
But cocaine and alcohol, for the first time in my life in that summer of 1987, after bending over that toilet, I loved myself. First
Wow,
time. And now,
wow.
now I'm 20. I was born in 61, so I'm 26 years old. For the first time in my 26 years, I love myself.
And that was because of the high that you received
A
from the
high of
drugs.
cocaine. It was a feeling like I had never experienced. And it, again, intensified by the fact that I had so much self-loathing, right? All of a
Mhm,
sudden, self-loathing that's there, except when I'm sleeping,
mhm,
is now gone and
mhm.
replaced by this, "Yeah, baby, let's go upstairs. Now the
Yeah,
girls love me. Everyone loves Brian."
yeah.
But then the feeling goes away, as any current or former cocaine user knows. And all of a sudden, Brian hates Brian again.
Mhm,
And so I found that dealer, gave him my last $100 in my pocket, went back downstairs, and Brian loved Brian again. Cocaine
mm.
and alcohol took over my life.
For how many years, Brian? I know you're 17 years sober now, I believe, since April of 2007. So from 1987 until 2007, was that your daily routine?
Not daily, but I mean, it was a routine. And it
Yeah.
was a routine that took me through three failed marriages. It was a routine that took me through losing all of my clients. And basically, and here's a lot of, I went to work for Mark, and that didn't work out because I was showing up drunk and high. And
Mhm.
really, if not for my brothers, I'd have been living under a bridge. And I think that's important to acknowledge privilege, right? I've had enormous privilege. They say addiction doesn't discriminate, but you have to acknowledge privilege. You really do.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I've had privilege both in addiction and in recovery. I mean, how many people have a billionaire brother who basically took care of them, and during a period where I would have been under a bridge.
Yeah.
And,
Wow. That's amazing of you recognizing that, and it's great to hear how close you are. And I'm sure it's humbling for him too to know that he literally was able to save his brother's life.
both
Is
my
what I'm
brothers saved
here.
my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
In 2005, in the summer of 2005, they literally saved my life. I decided to end my life by suicide. I decided that there was nothing it was just a black hole. All I saw was this black hole, and I was just not worthy of anything, and I was a burden on my family. So fortunately, I'd sent a email to a friend that was disturbing, and he got a hold of my brothers, Mark and Jeff, Jeff came immediately to my house. Mark flew in from LA. When Jeff walked in, I had a 45 automatic on my nightstand. There was cocaine everywhere, alcohol everywhere. Jeff took the weapon, and Mark showed up, and they dragged me kicking and screaming on my first of two trips to a psychiatric hospital. So you're more right than you know.
Mm.
If not for them,
Brian,
I'd be,
wow. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
if not for them, I'd be dead. If not, I bet, if not for my wife, I'd be dead. If not for many different things, I'd be dead.
What gave you the one of the things that we're trying before I ask the question, I want to give context. And this conversation is perfect for what we're striving to do in Mindful Journey. We're trying to normalize the tough stuff and humanize this shared experience that we're all on, because everyone faces stuff, even if it's not, an addictive tendency. It might be a divorce, a relationship challenge, a financial challenge. So your vulnerability that you're bringing here and giving us the raw insight and look is amazing. What I'd love to hear from you, if possible, because we, again, have interviewed different psychiatrists and such. And, the one recurring challenge that I see in our world today is that people know what to do and know the behaviors they should change, but getting them to change and having them
Well,
be able to deploy the courage to change can be the challenge. So I know you had two brothers, but what made
that's a
you
great
like,
question, because we could
yeah,
get into this. One of the things that just, oh, especially like if you're on LinkedIn or something, you see the 10 habits of mentally strong people, right? 10 they do this, they do this, they did. Well, if you're not that, does that mean you're mentally weak? So I just don't believe in that at all, right? What I do believe in is learned and unlearned resilience. So I believe that you go through these experiences and you survive them. And a lot of people don't, especially in the with opioids and fentanyl. You survive them, and what you hope is that you learn from them, right? Each little one, and you can look back and you learn and you build. And it's about building resilience, because we don't all have the same level of resilience. I mean, uh, some people have more innate levels, but you can build it. You can build it even without knowing it. And I think a lot of what allowed me, there were a totality of things, but I think a part of that was when I finally 2007 was able to really pull everything together and look back and look at what I've learned. And I think that's what has allowed me to build on that moving forward. And you talk about mindfulness. Mindfulness is a big part of my recovery. Mindfulness is a huge part of my recovery, because I have to, part of my building resilience is looking at where I am now, looking at what I can control, what I can't control, right? I can control my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions. And that is a big part of my recovery. But that, in Easter weekend 2007, when I had my second trip to the psychiatric facility, I was standing in the parking lot for the second time, and there were a few things that occurred to me. One, there wouldn't be a third trip back, I'd be dead. Two, I thought about something my father said. And again, family is also a privilege. Family is also a privilege. A lot of people go through these things. They're estranged from their siblings, they're estranged from their parents. They've come out of incarceration. They go through there are different levels. And so having it, or they're an only child, having two brothers who love me dearly and who I love is a privilege. And my father had two brothers. My father was a middle child like me. And my father was very close with his brothers. He and his older brother, Marty, worked in what is called an auto trim shop. They put on convertible tops and reupholster seats, very middle class, which middle class is a privilege too. But they did that for over 40 years until his brother passed. And my dad used to say to Mark, Jeff, and I growing up, he'd say, guys, whatever happens in your life, no matter where you go, you end up in different states and different countries, you pick up that phone and you tell your brother you love him. And you ask your brother if there's anything you can do. This is the relationship he had with his brothers that his father didn't still. You have to remember, his father was from the old country, back in this and didn't, and actually, if you listen to my dad, had a lot of trouble showing emotion, but this was the relationship my dad had. And it's not always, sometimes it's like a bad marriage. I mean, of course, siblings fight and go through things, But I thought about that. I thought about that, and I didn't want to lose my family. And if you want to know how that took, Mark, Jeff, and I live walking distance to each other here in Dallas, and I'm not saying that metaphorically. We live
Mhm.
walking distance. And my father, until he passed away, lived across the street from me.
Wow. That's a
That's not an
powerful
accident.
statement there. Yeah, because what I'm pulling from that is having this why, this purpose to live. And folks who complete suicide, sadly, they view their situation as final, that there is nothing beyond today. And what I'm
In
gathering
that
from you
moment.
is
That's right. In
in
that
that
moment.
moment, in that moment. And what I'm gathering from you when you're in that parking lot in April of 2007, and you're kind of envisioning, this is it. Like I'm reminded by what my dad's told me about my brothers. I've got something to live for.
That's
And
right. I mean, and you have to find a reason, you have to find purpose. And that
yeah,
becomes, I mean, and that becomes even more important in both recovery and in life, especially as you get older,
sure,
right? I
sure.
have fewer years in front of me than behind me. So you get to that point and you really, and I've struggled with this because I still struggle with depression.
Mm,
And I think it's normal to struggle with what is my purpose? Why am I here? Right?
yes.
What do I need to find? And Jeff, and you see Mark doing this, and you see my brother doing this, and it can become easy to get lost in that
Yeah,
and not have your own identity. Because,
yeah.
and believe me, there was a time when just I don't know how much time we have left, but there was a
No,
time
plenty,
when
plenty.
when Mark first became famous, and I had no self identity. When he became internationally famous, and so I hated myself. I just hated myself. So how can I don't know how to love myself on my own and find that kind of purpose and get
Hmm.
purpose from that. So I'll just be Mark Cuban's brother because people will buy me drinks, people will give me free drugs, I date girls half my age, blah 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 blah, all
Hmm.
because of nothing that I am, right? And honestly, I became the biggest douchebag on the Dallas party scene, total
Hmm.
just jerk, because I was living someone else's life.
Yeah,
I had no
yeah,
sense of who I was. Yeah, and so that's so important, especially as we age. Get a sense of who we are. What is our purpose? How are we finding purpose? And I'd be lying if I said I don't struggle with that now and then. You
yeah,
know,
yeah. It looks like there's a question that popped in here, or just a statement said that that's so powerful, and I echo that guest sentiment. Brian, I'm glad you brought that up because I don't know. Obviously, I'm familiar with Mark's work. As somebody who loves entrepreneurship, as an entrepreneur myself, I've certainly gleaned and learned different things from him. I obviously knew you had another brother. I don't know, either of them. I've never met either of them, obviously, but being as though you have one brother who is in the public spotlight, I was curious as to how you and Jeff would handle that, right? Because
yeah. Well, I
it,
never speak for my brothers, right?
right,
So the thing I never do is put thoughts in their head and speak
sure,
to them. So I can only speak to my experiences.
yep,
Uh, when it was problematic for me for a time, but not because of Mark, because of me,
right,
because
right,
I didn't know who I was, so I tried to fill it up with being who he was, and and that and that as I found recovery, I had to build Brian Cuban and figure out who Brian Cuban is and I had to stand on my own 2 feet and I had to stand on who I am. And,
hmm,
otherwise, if I didn't learn to do that, I'd probably have more of a strained relationship with my family and my brothers, and I'd be dead, or I'd be dead.
hmm, hmm.
Uh, Although they wouldn't put up with that, right? I mean,
They would have intervened. Yeah,
yeah, they
that's
intervened. But yeah, you have to build self identity is so important, and I had to learn
I
that part.
agree.
I had to
Yeah.
learn that part of it.
Well, and I think we're living in a time where I'm glad you brought up social media because there's an old adage that says comparison is a thief of joy. And
Yeah,
we're innately wired as people to look outwardly and assume that everyone else has it perfect. And when we put them on this pedestal, it's easy for us to inherently feel worse and inadequate.
you would. I mean, if I had it doesn't happen so much anymore. But if I had a, you know, dollar for every time I got trolled in social media, Twitter or whatever, and
Yeah.
someone said you're only this or that because of your brother, what do you have to be depressed about? It's a comparison. Comparison. You just have to let it. You learn to let it roll off. At first, it hurt, but
Of
you have to
course.
or made me angry. But you have to let it roll off, right? because one of the things I've also learned in recovery, which is huge, is what people think of me is none of my business.
So true. So true.
Yes. So I can't control that.
Definitely. What has kept you, Brian, in sustained recovery? It's 17 years now, right? So no drink, you've not had a drink in 17 years, no drugs in
Correct.
17 years.
And I've been in
Congratulations to you.
eating disorder recovery for 17 years.
Amazing. Amazing. Congratulations to
Thanks.
you. What have you relied on to remain consistent?
Well, I have a wife. We've been together 18 years. Who was with me for rock bottom. I love her dearly, and she's very supportive. I have two supportive brothers, and I have purpose. Not every moment, right? Not every moment. Not sometimes. Not sometimes. It purpose ebbs and flows for everyone, I think.
Mhm.
But every day I have to get up and find purpose, and that keeps me going. I have my 12. I don't go to do as many meetings as I used to. The pandemic got me doing it more online than going into the rooms. But there's the 12-step group, and then there's I do a lot of public speaking,
Mhm.
law firms and recovery events, and every time I share my story, that helps me a little bit, right? I
Yeah.
always learn on something. I always learn a little bit more about myself when I
Yeah.
tell my
Yeah.
stories, and then there are a lot of stories. I mean, back in 2006, when the Mavs went to the NBA championship for the very first time, I was trading championship tickets to my cocaine dealer for $1,000 in cocaine per game.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. So, for context for the guests listening in, or those who may watch later, of course, most are probably very, very familiar with Mark. But the Dallas Mavericks are the team that that Brian's brother Mark has owned. And so, what he's speaking to here, I just trying to drive this home for those who might not have context. The Dallas Mavericks were in a championship run that was '06, and you were getting tickets
I was
from
able to get
your,
free tickets from Mark.
and you
I
were
would get them
taking
for
those
friends. I would say
tickets.
I had a couple of friends, and what I would do is take them and call my cocaine dealer and
Wow,
trade
to
them for
get the
scalpers,
cocaine. Wow.
prices in cocaine.
And did Mark know, or did Jeff know, or
About
anyone in
9
your life?
years later, I told him I didn't want to embarrass anyone, and then it's kind of funny. I wrote a blog about it, and now I tell it when I speak because
Sure.
it's a looking back. It wasn't funny then, but it's a funny story now because I 2 nights in a row I did some and then got all paranoid and flushed it down the toilet, and so just that's cocaine users are a funny bunch, but the Dallas Morning News got hold of it and ran in a front page sports like they'd broken some story. I'm like, thanks for the thanks for the publicity.
Yeah.
The market already knew, but it was about 9 years before I talked about it.
Interesting. So where most would have been excited to go to those games because it's a Dallas
Oh, I still
Mavericks.
went to the games. I just
Oh,
didn't
you
give
still went.
any friends.
Okay. You were selling them. Okay, I got
Yeah.
you.
No,
I
I
got
use
you.
my tickets.
Yeah, yeah. Brian, what a guest asked, and this is a good question. I think it's timely for this part of the conversation with us. They asked, "What is your purpose today?" And I know you've alluded to some things with public speaking, but what gets you up in the morning every day?
The knowledge that I can say something about recovery. Obviously, I have things that I enjoy, and I have things that give me core purpose, right? I
Hmm.
enjoy writing. I
Hmm.
like writing, and I enjoy doing other things. Things that give me core purpose is that every day I have the opportunity to say something, post something, share something, speak to some event that will change one person's life, cause one person to say, it's time to get help.
Yes, yes.
In the Jewish, in Judaism, there is a phrase called tikkun olam. It
Hmm.
means changing the world with acts of kindness. Every
Mm,
I get up with to change at least one person's little corner of the world with an act of kindness.
that's powerful. Boy, I've not heard that before. Could you? I'm gonna have to Google it after because I'm probably gonna butcher the
Tikkun
spelling. But
olam.
could you? It's powerful. Our world, we're living in a time where kindness, kindness is always needed. But because of this, to bring up social media again, and I'm a social media user, I find great value in it. I post on it, etc. It brings connectivity, but sadly, it does give everyone a voice. Like you'd mentioned, the people who are maybe shaming you for being Mark's brother, and So with that, I often feel like one of the things that this allows people from being kind to others is because they're in a fearful state in their own life. They're not being kind to self. Is there anything that you do for your self-care that allows you to bring kindness into your life so you can extend that kindness to others?
I mean, I do writing is self-care. I've been learning how to sing, taking singing lessons.
Mhm,
Self-care. I mean, I practice mindfulness and do it mostly in the shower and meditation, where I have some of my best ideas. Allow myself, I call it clearing the mechanism.
mhm.
uh, and so those are the things I do. And I spend time with. I have my pets. I spend. I try to get exercise in, and nothing that's earth-shattering, right?
Mhm,
Things that we all have the ability to do in one form or another, but often don't make time for
mhm, mhm.
and often allow anxiety and anger and fear to fill the void instead of filling it with something else.
Definitely. What is your message today for someone who may be listening in and they're hearing your story and they're empowered, Brian, but they're, maybe dealing with a toxic divorce or difficulty or something that maybe puts them at their wits' end and they're having a difficult time moving forward? What's your message to that person?
My message is that there are people who care and there are people who love you. Have you Are you using projection to keep yourself from reaching out to those people? Because there are people who want to help you. There are people who want to help you and care about you. For 99.99, I mean, I'm percent, right?
Sure,
I'm generalizing, but
sure,
I think
sure.
that's true. And what I see, especially with addiction, and with addiction often comes marital stress, children's stress. I say, who have you talked to?
Mhm,
And again, and I'm not talking about the privilege of being, people don't have health insurance as a privilege. People maybe not have the resources to think, get those kind of therapeutic type resources. But who have you talked to? Well, I haven't talked to them. They have their own problems. I
mhm,
haven't talked to my brother. He has his own, you know, you talk to them. You have to talk to them. Make a list of the people who care about you and who you care about and reach out to them.
mhm,
And
mhm.
because odds are good that you're using projection to stop you from doing it. Lower your defenses, push out that brick from the brick wall you've put up,
Yeah,
force it on.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's
Ego.
no
It makes
magic
me
pill. People want to, there's no magic pill to this, right?
Right, right. Well, what you say makes total sense, and it's great advice from my vantage point. Makes me think about our egos, right? Like how we're such egoic beings in many regards, and as a result of that, we want to feel like we are projecting in a way, using your word, that we've got it all together, but sometimes at our own detriment
Sure.
because of the
And
ego.
you just hit on one of the possibilities that the correlating factors of why lawyers have such a high alcohol use disorder rate. Alcohol is our egos, and we think we can think our way out of it
Yes,
and
yes.
kick the can down the road. I call it the kick this can syndrome. Well, it hasn't ruined my life yet, so I'll deal with it tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. What specific, going back to the legal world, I'm glad you brought that up. What's specific to that world? And I kind of asked this question already, but maybe let me reframe it in a different way. Because I told you my brother's an attorney in the Pittsburgh area, and I've heard the stories from him, et cetera, and some of the friends of his that I've gotten to know. One of his friends actually he was not in the Dallas area. He was living in McAllen, I think, but his dear friend was living in Dallas, and he's an attorney who sadly completed suicide. I get that. Again, there's mental health.
Oh, by the way, I'm
Argument.
very impressed that you use the correct terms.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Mindful Journey is a well-being resource. So we've done our research and due diligence, and I don't always get it right. I'm constantly learning just from folks like yourself. But um, with the legal space specifically, what contributes to that? Like the culture.
Uh, and I mean, there's so many different things. One, lawyers, and then it depends what model you believe, right? If you believe kind of like the type A, type B personality, lawyers tend to be type A personalities. You also have lawyers, if you believe the Myers-Briggs model, lawyers, by far, we are thinkers, right?
Mhm.
And that can, I'm a feeler. I'm in the 5% of lawyers who are feelers, according to the Myers-Briggs.
Mhm.
Uh, and so we have a profession that may tend, especially it starts in law school too, where you think you can eventually think your way out of it, and you correlate you correlate where you are by whether there have been consequences.
Mm.
And we tend not to deal with it because we think we can think our way out of it. We tend not to deal with it until we're forced to. There are when you lose your license, you're suspended, you get a DWI, you wipe out a family, God forbid. And
Mhm.
so we tend to wait until we're hit with the consequence. We tend to wait till the consequences catch up with the problem
Mhm.
because we are thinkers. You have that. Lawyers tend to be people who don't deal with childhood traumatic experiences. And the lawyers are just people too. We're human beings, and lawyers who have been, abused in this, physically abused, sexually abused, all these different things, right? So you run the gambit of reasons. But I would say if you're looking at personality reasons, type A, thinkers.
Mhm. That's yeah. I was just curious. I don't. There's probably some attorneys who will end up listening to this. I trust, and we don't serve any legal entities. I think I told you Mindful Journeys onboarded, but I was curious. Specific. Go ahead.
You have to remember. It's a high stress. It can be a high stress profession, right? But
Right.
that doesn't mean we're the only high stress profession.
Right.
So you can't really, again, cause and correlation. You can't really point to any one thing, but there can be a lot of different factors, and I think I laid out a few of them.
Right. With it being a high stress environment, I think there's a lot of people dealing with stress in their lives today, not just because the rising of
And
inflation,
I'll
et
tell you what,
cetera.
lawyers are awful at reaching out for help. Awful.
And do you think
And
that comes back to ego?
ego thinking you can do it yourself, not wanting to lose a lifestyle, not wanting to get reprimanded by the bar, worried about. You have to remember, we call it our ticket, our law license, our ability to your ability to provide for your family, your ability to provide for your lifestyle is tied to that ticket, right?
Right.
And so you
Right.
don't want to, it's terrifying, the thought that you might lose it. And for a lawyer who's struggling with alcohol or some type, whether it's opiates or cocaine or whatever, uh, as long as you haven't done something that would be disciplinary, that would involve a disciplinary procedure, you're not going to lose your license. They're going to
Mhm.
help. We
Mhm.
have what's called lawyers assistance programs, but there
Yep.
is a huge fear of that.
Yep. Yep. Well, I've heard now bar associations are creating anonymity for their attorneys to ultimately align with certain providers in a geographical
Yeah.
region.
All lawyers assistance programs are anonymous.
Okay, so if
All of
there's a
them, every
lawyer,
state.
if there's a lawyer who's struggling, he or she can go and seek counsel, and
You
it's
can
not
call
put
up,
on
don't have to give
record.
your name or don't have
Got
to
it.
do anything. And some of it, the records are protected by statute.
Hmm.
But for them, yeah, it's all anonymous. They're not going to squeal to the state bar. Now,
Hmm.
the goal should be you get help before the state bar gets involved, right?
Hmm.
Because the state bar is different, for those who don't know, than lawyers assistance program. Lawyers assistance programs are to help the lawyer. The state bar's job is to protect the public.
Hmm.
So once the state bar is involved, you've probably done something wrong.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I recall years back I presented to a group before rolling out Mindful Journey. I think I'd shared with you I'd been doing some motivational speaking leadership training, and I spoke to a group of medical practitioners. I don't have a background in that at all, so did a bunch of research in advance and had come across this article called Why Happy Doctors Die by Suicide. And it was a physician who traveled out beyond the United States as well. She identified 1,500 physicians and who completed suicide. And one of the things that she identified in that research is that they were fearful of being judged by their community, that they would not be competent, right? That they
Absolutely. And
would lose business.
the
And
medical profession has a much more rigid and involved program for coming out of for dealing with substance use disorder, right?
mhm,
Much more rigid than the legal profession.
mhm,
So you have to be, you have to be monitored. You have to go through all these different things. And the legal profession doesn't have a real corollary to that. And so it
Mhm.
is, I can see that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Brian, you have been truly amazing. You've covered so much. There are usually a few questions I'd like to ask every guest, but you've kind of answered them before me even fully asking. There is one I'd love to ask just on a more lighthearted note before we conclude, unless there are other questions that come in from the guests. But what's something beyond the purpose? You kind of narrowed in on that, but what's a habit, a ritual, or routine that you've relied on to keep you happy and fulfilled in life, if you will? Bike ride. I'm just trying to give example, like a bike riding, running, exercise.
I love to exercise. Exercise gives me my endorphins. I've run, I've completed 8 marathons. But
Wow.
the last one was in 1990. I have a hip replacement now because of
Okay.
completing those marathons. So and plus I'm 63, so it's just it's brutal because the mind says, yeah, run that 8 minute mile. The body says, we'll stick to 12.
Yeah.
So I do this because of my hip. I don't run as much as I used to, but I do the elliptical trainer, and I love those endorphins. They make me feel good, and I can get a little tense if I don't, if I miss too many days.
Yeah. Okay. And how about anything? I know
And
you
I
said
take
you're
singing lessons. I've been taking singing lessons for a year and a half. And there's
Wow.
an interesting story behind that. We have a few more minutes. I back when I was in summer camp, I was probably 10 years old, 8 or 9, maybe 8. I went to this Jewish summer camp called Emma Kaufman Camp outside of Pittsburgh. And again, I was heavy, I was shy, and this kid befriended me, and we decided to participate in the Emma Kaufman Camp Talent Contest. And we were going to sing a Beatles song, and I think it was Hey Jude. And we got up there on the stage, and he sang, I froze, I just croaked. I croaked. All the kids started laughing at me and jeering, and I ran off crying, and I never sang another note. And I decided I was going to like get back on the horse, right? And I was going to take singing lessons. And I've even started putting them on social media where I've grown confident enough in my voice. I'm never going to be Billy Joel, but I will be some version of Brian Cuban.
That's awesome. I love that. I'm glad you brought up the social media. Can you share with us where we can find you on social media, and then also a brief synopsis of your upcoming book? I know,
Sure.
selfishly for McKeesport, you told me there's going to be a feature in the book. So yeah, I'll just pass it off to you to maybe share an overview of where we can get your
Sure.
books, the names of them, and social media.
I have a blog. I have a website, www.briancuban.com. And I also have an author site where you can read more about my upcoming book, The Body Brokers. And what The Body Brokers is about is a lawyer, a Pittsburgh lawyer, who finds his girlfriend in her place dead of a fentanyl overdose. And he and her roommate believe there's something more nefarious at work, and they embark on a journey to prove she was murdered. And the journey takes them to the heart of the fentanyl crisis, Kensington, Philadelphia. And so it is where they face all kinds of challenges and scenarios with the bad guys. And I think it'll be a really enjoyable book, and it really draws on a lot of my knowledge of the fentanyl crisis and tries to actually get a lot of the science correct.
Hmm.
So I think it'll be an interesting book, and McKeesport is in there. That can be found at my author website at www.authorbriancuban, and that's Brian with an I, or just go to Amazon. It's available for pre-order. Please pre-order. That helps me with
Yep.
bestseller list. You're not
Yep.
charged until it drops, until it ships.
Okay.
And so yeah, so either of those places.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. And I'll send that out to everyone as well, and then post on social media too. But Brian, so deeply grateful to you for sharing with us. Please continue to share your message openly and vulnerably as you did, because you're changing lives. And
Thank you so much. It was
um,
an honor to be on.
yeah, thank you. It looks like one more comment came in. I'll be putting in my order. So great. Thank you, Hind. And thank you, Brian. I'll close here and I'll connect with you offline. I'll send you this recording and such later. But again, thanks so much. Thank you all for being here. Everyone have a great day.
Have
Take
a
care.
great day, everyone. Take
See
care.
you, Brian. Take care.